All right, hello and welcome back to Online English Class. Hope you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to be working through an analysis of Lear's characterization in Act 3 for OTN 3. Okay, so we're going to be looking specifically at Lear throughout the course of Act 3. All right. Before we get into that analysis, all right, which is going to be pretty robust, all right, so strap on your seatbelts, right? Let's just run through our top of the week announcements. Remember your discussion grade procedure, okay? Question, summary, reflection, all right? Finish up OTN 2, all right? Be working on OTN 3. Make sure that you're getting your progress checks done. You should have completed and turned in progress check 7 yesterday by 3 p.m. If you have not done so, you are late. You can still get it in, but it will be for a late grade. And aside from that, you can, if you're in the AP class, begin your progress check number 8. All right, so just generally speaking, what you need to do, be rereading King Lear, completing your OTNs, completing your progress checks, and working on your quarter 4 short but perfect essay challenge, all right, which is going to be due May 20th. That's after the exam, okay? So you can kind of prioritize as you see fit, okay? As I've already stated, right, we're going to be finishing up the content of Unit 6 and taking our test on King Lear prior to the exam, which is going to be on May 13th, and we'll be using some of those days in preparation for that exam to look specifically at AP Pro's close analysis prompts. We are working on our analytical skills as we analyze this text, okay, but we're going to sort of drill down on what exactly those essays need to look like in order to impress your College Board readers later, all right? So that's coming up on May 13th, all right? So we've got some time, but we also are quickly approaching those dates. All right, so let's go ahead and get into OTN 3, which is going to analyze Act 3, all right? We're going to look at Lear today. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, all right, to get started, we want to go ahead and turn to Act 3 and think briefly about the context of what has come to pass, all right? At the end of Act 2, Lear has been confronted with the fact, all right, that he was wrong about his daughters, okay, that Goneril and Regan are not who he thought they were, and Cordelia, by extension, is not who he thought she was either. But more troublingly still for Lear, all right, is he's confronted with the reality that he is not in control of his existence, of his kingdom, of his family, even of his own personal well-being anymore. He is being confronted with a kind of existential reality that he is not the man that he judged himself to be, that he lived his life according to wrong notions, all right? That's a pretty difficult thing to confront for an individual. And at this point in a narrative, specifically a tragic narrative, the tragic hero, Lear, is supposed to have this thing called a moment of anagnorisis, right? Lear's fortunes have been reversed, okay? He has plenty of evidence that he was wrong, okay? And when confronted with that evidence, instead of, right, coming to a moment of anagnorisis, tragic recognition, in which a tragic hero reconciles themselves to reality and repents and humbles themselves for the ways in which they had misjudged or miscalculated that reality, right? Unlike that, Lear, okay, charges out into the storm and is sort of punished with insanity. He suffers by losing his mind, all right? Now, this kind of juxtaposes the traditional anagnorisis. Let me explain that just a little bit further with an example, all right? So a classic example of a tragedy, Sophocles' Oedipus the King, right? In the final movement of Oedipus the King, right, Oedipus is confronted with the tragic reality that he was wrong about who he was, about who he thought he was, right? He, very much like King Lear, was a man of power who was completely self-assured that his judgment, his calculations were correct, all right? He was Oedipus, the greatest man that he knew or anyone else knew, right? And in his moment of anagnorisis, he recognizes that his world is not governed by him and his reason or his intellect, but rather by the gods. the sovereign gods, and also significantly that he is a sinner, that he has gravely and grievously done things that are wrong. Okay, so in other words, Oedipus recognizes that the world, okay, is different than he thought it was, and that he is different than he thought he was, right? And he comes to this dramatic, repentant conclusion that it has all happened. O light, let this be the last time that I look on you. I am the man who loved where I should not love and killed where I should not kill. Okay, I am the cursed child. Right? He confronts his own mortality. He confronts the brokenness of both his environment and also of himself. And in that sense, according to Sophocles' understanding of reality, Oedipus has realigned himself with it and confessed of the ways that he grievously misjudged it. Lear, in stark contrast, okay, when confronted with the reality, all right, that he was wrong, he responds in a litany of ways, none of which are authentically or clearly or unequivocally penitent, none of which authentically express a kind of realignment or rejustification of his worldview to that which is true, that which is real, and that which is good. Okay? Now, one of the reasons why Shakespeare does this is because he is questioning the nature of the existence of that goodness and justice at its core. But before we get into those deeper nuances, all right, which we'll get into at the tail end of our analysis of Act 3, let's just look at the significance of what Lear is saying and doing in Act 3 as a whole. Okay, so at the outset of Act 3, Kent comes on the scene and asks a gentleman, all right, so this gentleman is just some dude who is obviously in league with Kent, all right, and Kent says, where's the king? Okay, Kent's looking for the king, dutiful servant that he is, as always, right? And the gentleman says, he's out contending with the fretful elements. He's bidding the wind blow the earth into the sea. Okay, so he's commanding the earth to be blown into the sea for the divisions between the firmament, and the seas or the oceans to sort of disintegrate. He's commanding the world to kind of return into chaos and void, which is kind of ironic, all right, because Lear here, when confronted with the kind of chaos of the fact, and it is indeed a fact, that he is not in control of the world in the way that he thought he was, all right, attempts to ironically or counterintuitively regain control of his environment by commanding it to dissolve into chaos, which is, again, funny because the world around him is seemingly dissolving into chaos. There's this hurricane, the winds are blowing, the seas are high, the rain is drenching him. All of it is a kind of chaotic environment. It's almost like going out into a hurricane and yelling at the wind to blow, right? Well, it's already blowing, okay, not because you commanded it to. Here, Lear is trying to recover any kind of sense of control as he is bidding the wind blow the earth into the sea or swell the curled waters above the main, okay? That things might change or cease. He tears his white hairs, okay? So he's tearing his hair out, commanding the elements to obey him, all right? In stark contrast to, say, like Jesus, who actually is king, who actually is in control, and iterates his kingship when he stands over the stormy seas and says, stop, and then they stop. Wow, okay, that is obviously a testimony of Christ's command over the elements. And indeed, if one believes that actually happened and Jesus actually did that, right, then it illustrates, okay, a king who actually is in control. And this sharply contrasts Lear, a king who is not actually in control. The impetuous blast of nature with eyeless rage. Okay, so notice the sort of the paradox of the personification of the natural elements being both eyeless, which is to say, like personless or thoughtless, careless, but also rage, which is a human emotion. Okay, so the gentleman doesn't even really have the language to fully articulate the indifference of the natural world. It is a kind of eyeless rage that makes nothing of both his hairs as they sort of scatter them about, and also of his commands. They just make nothing out of him. All right, and he's just running to and fro, trying to conflict with the wind and rain, trying to impose his will on a natural environment that is existentially outside of his control. Okay, so here, right, I think interestingly, right, this is Lear's just reversal, a kind of contrapasso, all right, if you remember Dante's Inferno. For the man who thought of himself as the master of the earth and all that is in it, who believed himself to be owner of vast lands and the people within them, his thoughts, which did not reflect reality, all right, now, and Lear is increasingly recognizing here in his age that they never did. Okay, it reminds me of the grandmother from A Good Man Is Hard to Find, who was confronted with the fact that not only is she unrighteous now, but the way that she viewed the world her entire life, the way that she viewed herself as one of the good people, was wrong all her life long. Lear in the same way. Not as a good man, rather, okay, but he does fancy himself a good man, but as a powerful man. A man who is in control, a man who ought to be respected. Okay, that man whose thoughts never aligned with reality is sort of given what he's already chosen: insanity, a mind that cannot accurately perceive reality, which, if you remember back to Much Madness is Divinest Sense, is literally the essence or the meaning of what it means to be mad or crazy or insane. To have a mind that just simply cannot square itself or accurately perceive, to any extent, reality. All right. So this impression is kind of continued for us. All right, in scene 2. Around line 1, in which Lear says, once again, commanding nature, we get to hear him do it, specifically, blow winds and crack your cheeks, rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanos, spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks, you sulphurous and thought-executing fires, vault couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head, and thou, all shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world, crack nature's molds, all Germans spill at once, that makes ingrateful man. The fool begging Lear to take shelter from the elements, right? Go inside, this night neither pities wise men or fools. Lear continues, rumble thy belly full, spit fire, spout rain, nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription. All right, so seemingly what Lear is articulating is the fact that the natural world is something that owes him no subscription. All right, that he is sort of submitting to the moral chaos of nature. All right, unlike, say, his children, which actually should treat him a certain way, he's beginning to recognize that neither his children, right, or anyone should treat him with any particular amount of respect or affection. Right, because ultimately we all exist in this natural context that is completely disempowering, amoral, all right, and we're ultimately all going to be scattered like Lear's hairs are being scattered by the winds and the rains of the hurricane. Okay, then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man. But yet I call you servile ministers that will with two pernicious daughters join your high engendered battles against a head so old and white as this. Oh ho, 'tis foul. All right, so he concludes his thought here by saying that if you, O nature, O storm, are going to impose such suffering on me, on my old white head, all right, and let my daughters get away with this at the same time, okay, then this world is foul. This world is just given over to chaos, all right? So here, while it seems that Lear is confronting his own weakness and sort of disempowered state, which we would sort of say, well, is that not his anagnorisis? Is he not confronting his own existential weakness? Wasn't that his hamartia? Well, no, not exactly, okay? Because what Lear is not doing, all right, what Lear is not doing is confronting the fact that he mistreated and misjudged Cordelia, okay? He is rather focused on the injustice of the world that seems so chaotic that his pernicious daughters are being rewarded, and he, this sort of old, sweet man who deserves to be treated better, is being treated foully. Okay? And so, and even as he sort of commands nature, illustrating his sort of lack of an authentic confrontation, all right, with the real problem at the root of his character. Okay? So here, Lear embraces a kind of like nihilism. Okay, and it's funny because his nihilism is an expression ultimately of his own vanity. All right, so if the world, right, here's Lear's reasoning: if the world is not as I thought it was, and if it's not fair according to my judgment of fair, then it is because the world is essentially unjust, unfair, and completely chaotic and meaningless. Now, the narrative, all right, one of the nuances here is the narrative offers the fact that that is a reasonable response. But, okay, Lear comes to that conclusion through deeply selfish, deeply limited, deeply misjudged kinds of analysis of his environment. His nihilism is ultimately just an expression of the fact that Lear cannot confront the fact, and it is a fact, all right, a fact, a truth, a truism, all right, that what he did was wrong and how he viewed the world was wrong, okay? So it's similar to this, okay? Let me give you like an anecdote to help illustrate this, right? Whenever I have to discipline a student who thinks that they're good, all right, it's a lot easier to discipline students who think that they're bad, all right, or who don't really care, okay, because they don't push back. They also oftentimes don't learn anything because they don't care about what you're saying. So that's kind of its own sadness, its own brokenness. But this is particularly evident whenever I try and discipline someone who is who believes themselves to be good, who believes themselves to be somehow have like a certain amount of virtue capital. Right? And you confront that individual on the fact that perhaps they've misjudged themselves, right? You show them some evidence or you call into question that perception of themselves. And their response, 9 times out of 10, is to argue back, all right? To argue that I am misjudging them, right? Does that make sense? And that is a perfectly reasonable kind of assessment. But that assessment that perhaps we both are wrong, or perhaps you're wrong and you don't know it, and there is no the truisms that you are articulating or offering are equally wrong, and maybe we're all just wrong, and maybe everything's just wrong, right? That sort of jump into that nihilistic uncertainty, okay, is a reflection of a deeper vanity, where that student is just simply on a basic level unwilling to hear me say, hey, you did something wrong. Okay, so Lear is like in that same position, where when confronted with the fact that he is wrong, he falls into nihilism, which is not justice either, because who is he not reconciling himself with? Cordelia. Cordelia has been wronged. Lear, okay, while it would seem that he is confronting his own smallness, right, drifts into a kind of vain nihilism that protects the sense, all right, that if he was wrong about the world, it's because the world is totally meaningless, all right? If he was wrong, it's because there was no rightness to be discovered. All right? Interesting. Okay? So, significantly, right? Okay, I just want to reaffirm this. He does not repent of his arrogance and seek reconciliation with Cordelia. That would be an appropriate response, an authentic anagnorisis. So, think about the grandmother, once again, in A Good Man is Hard to Find, right, in the final moments, in the kind of a climax of that story, right in the final moments of her life, when she reaches out to the misfit and says, "You're one of my babies," right? "You and me, we are of the same blood. We are kin. I helped make you," right? "And you are a part of me," right? When she does that, okay, she's kind of embracing her own complicity. Here, Lear, by articulating kind of nihilism, is doing the exact opposite, right? He is not saying wrong is something that I am guilty of, but rather wrong doesn't exist, and neither does right. This world is just foul, okay? All right, so Lear continues, or this impression is kind of continued for us. All right, in Act 3, Scene 4. Okay, so let's quickly turn over to Act 3, Scene 4. Okay, and there in Act 3, Scene 4, okay, Lear seems to have this moment of kind of moral development or kind of moral education. His suffering seems to be producing some moral enlightenment in him. Okay, so Lear says here, right, "Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are, that bade the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and widowed raggedness defend you?" Right? So here, right, what is Lear considering? Well, he's considering the ways in which, all right, the poor, the wretched, the widow, the ostracized, the mentally unstable have been underserved in his kingdom under his watch. Okay? From seasons such as these, "Oh, I have taken too little care of this." All right? Wow. Okay. Well, okay, Lear, we're getting closer to some kind of articulation of wrongdoing, okay, that would lead to a kind of humbling and a repentance. "Oh, I've taken too little care of this. I haven't thought about this enough. Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel," right? In other words, expand your empathy. Feel what the wretched feel, that thou mayest shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. So if you feel what the wretches feel, you'll give of your excess to them because you'll know what it means to need. All right? Okay, that's a pretty good point, but right? How is this sort of undercut? How is this sort of mystified? How is this sort of flash of moral enlightenment then consumed right back into the darkness of an unbroken night for Lear? Well, once again, there's a kind of there's a self-centeredness to his empathy. There is a self-focus to his growing sense of injustice, and that is, all right, when he was in power, when he actually had the ability to change these kinds of things, right, he didn't experience what it was like to be disempowered, to be wretched, and therefore, right, didn't, because he lacked empathy for them, didn't care about them, right? Now that he shares their experiences, he is able to feel sufficiently bad for them, care about their situation, and would, if he could, offer some of his generous excess to them, which he no longer has. All right? In other words, Lear's empathy is limited by his own experience of suffering. Okay? This is sort of Shakespeare pressing us in further into a world that is not as it ought to be, all right, where people suffer, inhabited by people who are also not as they ought to be. Okay, insufficiently empathetic, and when empathetic, only empathetic insofar as as those who are suffering have similar experience to themselves. Okay, so in other words, there's limits to Lear's kind of altruism here. Okay, there's limits to his definition of injustice, and it basically comes down to injustice is what that which is unjust are the same thing as the bad things happening to me. All right, okay. This impression is solidified even further, all right, when Lear comes in contact with Edgar, who is disguised as Poor Tom. Okay, now Edgar's obviously not actually insane, but rather just in a disguise, and he's sort of ranting and raving like a madman in order to sort of solidify his disguise. Okay, got it, fine. But, all right, when Lear is confronted with this kind of evidence of an actually poor, marginalized, underserved, underloved, rejected member of his former kingdom, Poor Tom, right, he reasons, comes to the conclusion, right, he says, what makes you so unhappy? What drove you insane, Poor Tom? What is the catalyst of your suffering? Okay? And the answer to the question that Lear gives is nothing could have made your nature, subdued your nature into insanity except for unkind daughters. Okay? Once again, Lear blames his insanity. Lear blames his suffering on his unkind daughters, not his own miscalculation or misjudgment. Here, right, notice the kind of contrapasso for Lear's insane or miscalculated worldview is that he is sort of pressed further into that insanity, all right, in which he does not have this opportunity to have an authentic moment of anagnorisis, to realign himself with justice. In fact, the more he is exposed to his own suffering, the further into insanity he is driven. Okay, that is again a broken evidence of a kind of broken world, and moreover, right, he sort of understands the end all be all of human pain. In his limited to his own experiences, right? If you are suffering, right, then it has to be in a way that I can understand. Okay, it's because you got betrayed by your daughters, which is obviously not true of Poor Tom. Okay, Poor Tom, if he was not Edgar in disguise, okay, would have been betrayed by perhaps being dealt a terrible hand and an insane mind by his environment. Okay. And not been given the proper care throughout the course of his life. Okay, so all of this, right, is sort of the essence of Lear's characterization in Act 3 in the storm. Right, the storm is an illustration of, or a confrontation, or an example of Lear being confronted by the realities of his world, and his response significantly is to be driven further into insanity, to be even further miscalculating, okay, misjudging that which surrounds him. Okay, this is sort of dramatized and even sort of mocked in Act 3, Scene 4, where he puts his daughters on trial, again grasping for justice. Again, grasping for the old seat that used to be his as judge and jury of his kingdom and his family and ultimately his world. Okay. By the end of Act 3, Lear, though there are flashes of moral development that comes along with his suffering, flashes of kind of chastening or a realignment with reality and goodness. Okay, he does not significantly go on his own volition to Cordelia, repent of his wrongdoing, and realign himself with reality, but rather is sort of cursed to be driven further into madness, to try and recover by whatever means necessary, whatever sense of control that he can obtain. This is evident in his sort of drifts into nihilism, which is ultimately a protection of his vanity. It's evident in the way that he understands and articulates his empathy, all right, or his outrage at the injustice done to the widow, to the orphan, to the madman, to the homeless, okay, and then finally iterated in his sort of crazy judgment of his daughters, attempting once again to reestablish some kind of control of this environment. All right, so that's Lear in Act 3. All right, obviously there's a lot more in there, and if we were reading this play word for word together, then we could go through the significance of each and every statement of Lear, which again would take a very long time, and you, as the reader, you can be making those connections as you move through, but I'm just trying to give you some general impressions of what is going on in Lear's character arc here. Okay, so I hope you have a great day. Tomorrow we'll return to Act 3 and look at some the other characters, notably Kent, and then we'll look at the subplot as it develops with Gloucester, Edgar, and Edmund. All right, have a great day.